Welcome to Giving an Answer, the show dedicated to defending the historic Christian faith. I am your host, A.C. Felder, and today the topic is Christianity and the New Age, and I have a special guest. My special guest is Dianna Newman. Let me tell you about Dianna. She is actually a Canadian. She has earned undergraduate degrees from, well, she actually had an undergraduate degree in a double major from the University of Toronto. So you are our northern neighbor.
Yes.
Earned a master's in apologetics with a concentration in philosophy from Southern Evangelical Seminary, my alma mater. She travels nationally and internationally with team. I'll get her to talk on that in a minute. Speaking on different issues such as New Age, abortion, knowability of history, Islam, and as a matter of fact, I actually heard you giving a talk at the National Apologetics Conference, which is why I decided to invite you here today. So welcome to the show, Dianna.
Thank you for having me. It's good to be here.
Well, I did mention team, so could you tell the audience just a little bit about what that is?
Sure. TEAM is an acronym for Tactical Evangelism and Apologetics Mission. It's the missions arm of our alma mater, Southern Evangelical Seminary, and it's a means of students, faculty, alumni to travel with their knowledge. And so we go to churches, we have conferences. There's been several international trips that I've been on, just teaching apologetics, cultural apologetics at that, just kind of taking the theoretical / philosophical knowledge and making it more practical.
Okay, and I hope to be making some of those trips as well because I am on the team roster. I just haven't done anything yet. So
okay, we definitely have to connect after.
Yes, definitely. So let's get to it. Christianity in the New Age. How in the world did you get interested in this topic? Christianity in the New Age?
Christianity in the New Age. Well, I think that you would agree with me that as a result of graduating from Southern Evangelical Seminary, I think that we've been trained to be good listeners, and I think that we've been trained to have sensitive ears to the types of words
Yes.
and language and ideas that
Yes.
people have. That's the wonderful thing about Southern
Yes.
Evangelical,
Right.
is it really teaches you how to think well. But I just started noticing that we were using the same language, Christianity and New Age-ism / spirituality. We were using the same language, even though we're two completely worldviews. I was noticing that the distinctions were breaking down between Christianity and New Age, and not just the New Age. It's almost every religious, there's a religious thrust just to break down the barriers and the distinctions between faiths, as if all faiths are one and the same thing. So I started noticing those things, mainly the language of Christianity and New Ageism being pretty similar, and so that kind of propelled me to look into it a little bit more.
And you raise a very interesting point because I noticed that I'm actually teaching a class in cults at the church that I attend, and I did an exercise where I took a passage out of the Bible where Jesus talks about himself, and I explain in that passage we have words like resurrection, the life,
Right.
and all these type of words, and I explain how each cult interprets those words differently.
Right.
They will use the exact same words, but they will put entirely different meanings behind them.
Exactly.
And so what you're saying is absolutely true. So if you're not careful to listen, like you were saying, we're trained to listen.
Yes.
Because someone could say, well, I believe in Jesus. Tell me about the Jesus you believe in.
Tell me, because the New Age believes in Jesus as well.
Exactly.
So does Islam, and a lot of different ones do. So exactly.
UFO cults believe in Jesus.
We all do. He is a wonderful, wonderful man, but it goes deeper than that.
Right, right.
There's a theology that's attached to a lot of the things that we say.
That's why I always have to ask, who do you say Jesus is? I have to ask the same question that
Right.
Jesus asked.
Right.
Who do you say that Jesus is?
Right.
Okay, so why is it important for Christians to even be concerned about this whole New Age spirituality thing?
Well, they need to be concerned, like I said before, the language that we're using. I mean, language of the New Age movement, if you will, is meditation and positive thinking and positive words. All of those things, I would argue, are quite Christian. God tells us what to think about, and he does tell us what to say. He does tell us to meditate. Joshua 1:8 talks about that. Meditate on the law of the Lord day and night, and you'll have good success. So Christians just need to be concerned about how they articulate certain things. We never want to be in a conversation with someone who subscribes to New Age spirituality and have that person walk away thinking that we're saying the same thing.
Right.
That would be a travesty. So I think that I don't necessarily think that everyone needs to go to seminary. Not everyone needs to study as deeply as perhaps you and I have, but we're all required to give an answer for the hope that we have in us. And I think that whether people ask us that or the culture demands a response from us, we need to be able to articulate our doctrine well.
So if a Christian comes across the person who is in the New Age movement, what are some of the challenges that person might face?
Well, so for example, and we said this just briefly a couple of minutes ago, one of the challenges is articulating well what we mean by Jesus's divinity, because the New Age teaches that Jesus was divine as well. They only say that we all are divine.
Right, right. Of course he's divine. Everything's divine.
Everything's divine. Rocks and trees, everyone's
right.
divine.
Of course he's God.
Yeah, right, exactly.
What's not?
Exactly. We have to be able to articulate things like the Trinity. We see that with Paul. Paul, we wouldn't say was a philosopher, but in Acts 17, he was dealing with the Stoics and the Epicureans. Paul was dealing with the Gnostics in the first century. I would argue, was dealing with Platonism as well in the first century. So we just have to know. That's the basis of recognizing false teaching. We can't recognize false teaching if we don't know what false is and know what truth is. And I think that unknowingly, perhaps, the church very generally is accepting certain things as a direct result of not knowing the philosophical implications that come with certain ideas.
Right. Well, we've been talking about New Age, but we've never defined it. So what is New Age?
New Age spirituality is hard to define simply because it's not, New Age spirituality isn't organized. So whereas in Christianity, we have a central figure named Jesus, and we have a text called the Bible, or Islam has a central figure called Muhammad, and they have texts, Quran, Hadith, and Sunnah. Mormonism has a central figure named Joseph Smith, and the Book of Mormon is there. The New Age movement is not like that. There is no one central figure, and there are no normative texts. Really, it's an umbrella term that unites certain assumptions about the world and about reality. And so in different ways and in different measures, New Age spirituality affirms 5 core assumptions, and that is what can be called New Age spirituality.
Okay, let's deal with those assumptions.
Sure. Well, the first is, and these 5, I'm not sure that everyone would term them the same way that I am, but it does the job for me, so we'll just keep these 5 as I understand them to be. The first is metaphysical monism. Metaphysics is just another word for reality, and monism comes from 2 Greek words. Mon is a prefix in Greek, and it means one, and ism is a suffix that means basically theory or state of affairs. So metaphysical monism is a theory about reality that says reality is one.
Okay, well, let's flesh that out a little bit.
Yes, we need to.
Yes,
right?
yes.
Yeah.
What do you mean by reality is one?
Well, if you go back in Greek philosophy, before Socrates, the philosophers in Greece, they spent a lot of time discussing reality. What is reality?
They had a lot of time on their hands.
They had a lot of time. They didn't have
TV.
iPads or TV. What else are you going to do except discuss reality?
Right. Okay.
So that's what they spent a lot of their time doing back in ancient Greece. Some philosophers thought that the basis of reality was water. Some thought the basis of reality was air. Pythagoras, whom I'm sure we all remember the Pythagorean theorem from our math class, Pythagoras, he was a philosopher, and he thought the basis of reality was numbers. And so throughout Greek philosophy, early Greek philosophy, there was a lot of discussion about what the basis of reality was. Along came Parmenides, who kind of elevated the discussion on reality because he was more philosophical, I guess, than his predecessors. And what he said was this: in regards to the problem of permanence and change. And I'll explain what that is.
Okay.
So people are able to take a look into the world, look out at the world and see a lot of different things, trees and people and animals. And we see all of these things changing. Trees get taller, people develop, animals, they develop. There's a lot of change happening if we look out in the world. But even though all that change is happening, there's a sense in which things remain permanent. Like trees, they get taller, but they stay the same tree.
Right.
People develop in their stages of growth, but I'm still Dianna, even though I've gone through a lot of changes. And so that's the problem of permanence and change that the philosophers were intrigued about. How is it that things can change yet still remain permanent? That is the enigma for them. And so Parmenides came along and he said that, well, there's two things that things can differ from each other. And bear with me because this is going to get a little bit philosophical.
I know where you're going. I've had metaphysics. I know where you're going.
Right.
Okay.
Parmenides said that there are two things that things can differ from each other. They can differ in their being or they can differ in their non-being. They can't differ in their being because if you have two things that both be, then there's no difference between those two. Things can't differ in their non-being because non-being isn't a thing. It's like saying things differ by nothing. So because things don't differ, and again, this is a metaphysical discussion, we're talking about reality and the problem of permanence and change. Parmenides said that because things don't differ in their being, in their existence, and they don't differ in their non-being, then that must mean that all things are the same. Hence, monism. There's only one kind of thing.
And what is that one kind of thing?
It, throughout time, there's been a distinction between qualitative monism and qualitative and quantitative monism. So quantitative monism says that there's only quantitatively, numerically, there is only one thing. There's only one spirit, and we're all instantiations or manifestations of that one spirit. That's something that's going to come out in the New Age, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Quantitative monism is really not that popular because, of course, we can take a look out into the world and see there's more than one thing.
Right, like I'm different than this cup.
Right, you're very different. So there's got to be at least two because, as you've said, you're different than that cup. So quantitative monism isn't that popular. Qualitative monism says that though things look different, there's only one quality of thing. And so there's a spiritual reality, and that spiritual reality is the thing that runs the universe, and we are all an emanation, if you will, of that one spiritual reality. That's monism, this idea that reality is only one thing.
Okay.
The second core assumption of New Age thought, that would be pantheism. Whereas monism is more philosophical. It's an idea having to do with metaphysics, with reality. That's what metaphysics is. Pantheism is a worldview. Comes from two Greek words, pan and theos, which means that all is God. God is all. And you can see how that flows from monism, because if it's true that there's only one thing, then all things must be God.
Right. Okay.
So pantheism flows necessarily from monism. The third core assumption of New Age thought will be the idea of the divine within. Shirley MacLaine made this very popular back last century. She was famous for standing in front of the ocean and yelling to the stars, "I am God,
I am God."
I am God.
Yeah.
This idea that we are divine is a New Age idea, and again, it flows really well from monism and pantheism. If there's only one thing, and if it's true that all things are God, then because I'm here, I must be God. This must be God as well in some type of way. Not a personal being God. There's no personal being as we would ascribe in Christian theology, whereas God is a person, one essence, three persons. In New Age thought, God is a force. He's an energy. He is the reason of the universe, if you will. It's not a personal being. It's just this divine energy that animates the world.
Okay.
The fourth core assumption of New Age thought is going to be reincarnation / karma, which reincarnation is the belief that we all keep coming back to the earth in different forms based on our karma. So if I'm good in this life, I might come back next time as a queen. If I'm bad in this life, I might come back next time as a cockroach. That's karma.
Okay.
That your effect can be controlled by how well you work the law. Karma has no regard for moral intuitions. Karma isn't moral. It's just straight law and effect. That's the fourth pillar. And then the last core assumption of New Age thought is going to be this idea of transforming consciousness. The thing that separates us from Jesus is Jesus was fully conscious. He had reached that stage of enlightenment where he was fully aware of the fact that he was God. And so in different ways, different exercises can be done to transform your consciousness. Meditation becomes relevant here. Is if you meditate properly, you can elevate your consciousness, transform it, and live on a higher plane than people whose consciousness aren't transformed.
What do you mean higher plane?
A higher plane, one with the universe. The golden thread of the universe is this divine energy. I always refer to Oprah when I'm talking about this. I love her, wonderful, wonderful lady, but she's, in my mind, she's kind of the poster child for New Age thought, because when she was running her show, she would have people to come in, Eckhart Tolle, and people like those, Gary Smalley, I believe his name was, that would talk about transforming your consciousness and tapping in to the universal energy, tapping into what is outside of you so that you can live on a higher plane, the plane that Jesus lived on. Gandhi got pretty close to it. Buddha got pretty close to it. They lived a higher virtue in their livelihood than most people would ever hope to.
So what's wrong with these different pillars?
What's wrong? In a nutshell, they're not Christian.
Okay. Okay. That's number one.
That's the biggest thing, is they're not Christian.
Okay. How are they, well, I'll let you go ahead and explain.
Well, there's different responses that one might be able to give. Monism, we're not monists as Christians, we're dualists. We assert that there's not just one thing, there's two types of things. There's material and immateriality. So we flat out deny this idea that monism rules the day. That's the first thing. Pantheism, if I was going to address pantheism, I would just say I'm not a pantheist, I'm a theist. I think that there's a clear distinction between the creator and that which he's created, just like there's a clear distinction between a painter and the painting. So I just outright deny the validity of pantheism. I was flying one time and I was sitting beside a very nice lady who we had a discussion. We were talking for about 3 hours just on different things. And she was a lot of different things. I think she was a little bit Jewish, and she was a little bit Christian. Definitely she was a little bit Buddhist. But she was affirming some very pantheistic ideas. And so I asked her to account for that. I mean, we're both looking at a chair right now in front of us as we're on this plane. How is that God? You're going to have to give an account for that. If you do think that all things are God and God is all things, you have to account for how this is God, and you have to account for how evil is God. There's no, pantheism collapses the distinctions between what I would say reality requires, between good and evil, between true and false, between there and here and here. I mean, it just collapses all types of distinctions.
Now, I've heard that they actually say that it transcends, or that it's higher than good or bad. I don't know what that means.
Thank you. I was just about to. Words are the sorts of things that if you can frame them properly, they sound very legitimate.
Right, right.
But unless you give an account for what you're actually saying, they're just words. I don't know what it means to transcend this here and now and live on another plane? Are we talking about a fourth dimension? Is that what you're talking? You just have to give an account for the types of things that you're saying. And I think the attractiveness of New Age spirituality is it because it appeals to very spiritual intuitions that we all have. We all, the Bible says that God has written eternity in our hearts.
Right.
We're made in the image and likeness of God. There is a void that must be filled by Him. And so we just have spiritual inclinations, and we will fill it with whatever sounds good and whatever suits our fancy. But that doesn't mean that we ought not be able to justify what it is that we're thinking.
Right. Okay. What's some of the other ones? I think reincarnation was one.
Reincarnation is another one. Reincarnation, and honestly, if you can respond to monism and show that monism fails as a philosophically coherent idea, then everything else will fall as well. So if monism is false, pantheism necessarily is. If pantheism is false, this idea of the divine within, necessarily that's false. If you can show that, then you can show reincarnation is necessarily false. Reincarnation comes from Plato. Plato was the one that taught that souls existed eternally. Right. And that at birth they incarnated a body. There's a philosophical problem with that, which I'm sure you've heard as well at some point during your SCS days, is that it's impossible for infinites to be traversed. If the soul really did live in eternity, then it would never have been able to get to time.
Right, right.
So there are just some philosophical problems with this idea of reincarnation. Karma, there's problems with that as well. That subscribes to naturalism, which is a worldview. Naturalism says that you can alter your reality by the laws that you invoked, but we're not naturalists. We're supernaturalists because we do very well think that there's a transcendent in addition to the natural world.
Now, this is one of the things that sort of always confused me about karma is how did it start? I mean, when did your first life start? If you never lived, then you never did anything wrong.
Right.
So what are you paying for? I don't understand how that whole thing even gets started. I'm not paying for anything. I just started.
Right. See, this is the gist of New Age meditation is that you must empty your mind of all categories of thought, logical categories of thought. So pantheistic religions, Buddhism, Eastern mysticism, they all rely on this premise that in order for you to get to enlightenment, you have to throw off the bondages of logic. It's not it's not either or, it's both and. Which I don't know how you do that, because even that requires you
right
to use logical reasoning to even make that type of statement.
Right.
But this is the gist of New Age thought, is that it's not designed for you to assess it logically. You just have to give yourself up to it. That's different from Christian meditation. Christian meditation requires that you think on something very specifically, analyze it, and rehearse it very specifically, and that happens to be the thoughts of God.
And so how do you see this playing out in the church that's becoming a concern for you?
Well, it's a concern on different levels. Again, my argument is not at all. Of course, there are people who are very clearly New Age people who are trying to make Christianity something that it's not. That's always going to be the case. But where it becomes very important in our Christian theology is that if you don't have an understanding of what pantheism is, if you don't have an understanding, rudimentary, I mean, again, going back to the Apostle Paul, he wasn't a philosopher, but he knew what was competing with his day enough to address it. If you don't have a basic acknowledgement of what those things are, you won't be able to identify it when you hear it. Certainly, I think that there are things that concern me, I guess, in the church that aren't necessarily New Age per se, but if we're not careful, they lead right to it. So, going back to Plato, Plato was the one that taught that souls incarnated bodies. The value of a person, according to Plato, was in the soul, it wasn't in the body. And so he had that duality where soul's immateriality was more important than materiality body.
Right. Well, one of the things that I noticed about the New Age movement is that it repeats the original lie. I mean, doesn't it go back to the garden? I mean, you can be like God.
Good point.
And man is always trying to be like God, and the author behind the New Age movement is the same as the author behind that lie in the garden.
Subtlety, that's the subtlety. Things will only work if they're subtle enough to make you think that it could possibly be true. Did God say? So Eve was like, I don't know, did he really say? I can't really remember. He must not have really said, because you're telling me that he didn't.
Right.
So there's a certain subtlety that's involved with the language that we use. But again, and we were speaking about this is the necessity of teachers in the church, in the house of God, that is able to kind of flesh these things out a little bit more, lest we find ourselves in a place where we really don't want to be.
Right, because I can see exactly what you're saying, because what happens is that these ideas become popular in culture, and then once they become popular in culture, we start to see it propagated.
That's right.
Into the church, because what usually happens is that a lot of teachers aren't as, I don't want to be negative here, but aren't as theologically trained or astute. So they'll hear things in the general culture which sound fine, and they will bring that into the church unbeknownst that they are actually propagating New Age doctrine without even knowing it.
Unbeknownst.
Right.
And that's really what concerns me. This idea that, of course, as Christians, we believe that there are certain things that we will never, ever know about God.
Right.
What we do know about him, it's not because we got there by ourselves, but he told us, and we believe that he's authoritative enough to be believed. But our statements are subject to analysis.
Right.
Our statements and our positions and our views, they're subject to analysis. And we can't just import things into Christianity that Christianity doesn't allow for, in the very same way that that's true of Islam importing, or Muslims importing certain things into Islam. We can't import certain things into Christianity just because it sounds good or just because the culture is requiring it of us. We have to be diligent and study the scriptures.
And we will end on that note. Didn't it fly by?
It did. It did, just like that.
I want to thank you again, my guest, Dianna Newman, for talking with me on Christianity and the New Age. And that will end this episode of Giving an Answer. Be sure to join me again next time. And until then, goodbye and God bless. You can find out more about Giving an Answer, as well as listen to other episodes by visiting us online at www.givingananswer.org.